Morning Intuitives, another before work video. I got a haircut. It's getting a little warm. A question that's been raised on this channel a couple times, and it is something to surmise about, and it's fun to think of, although sadly it is highly improbable that this will ever happen. But what would the world be like if INFJ leaders, ran the world? If the majority, if not all, of the world's leaders were amongst our ranks, what would that be like? How would the world be different? Let me start by saying, especially for those of you in Western countries such as the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Ireland, the whole of Europe, Australia, etc., biggest thing I can say is we wouldn't be living in this neoliberal nightmare, that's for sure. So if somehow INFJs were able to be elected into the world's top positions, the era of Reaganism, Thatcherism, Clintonism, Blairism would swiftly come to a decisive end, and those ideologies would be thoroughly exposed for not only their failures but for their absolute fraud in what they claimed to be able to do and what the reality was. And essentially it was make the rich richer and, give the boomers everything at the expense of future generations, and then blame it on immigrants and the youth. So, what would countries look like with INFJ leaders? Well, there'd be a lot of social change. There's some anecdotal evidence to suggest this based on the leadership of Nelson Mandela, who was among our ranks as an INFJ, and the changes he so fought for and believed in so deeply that he was, willing to spend decades wrongfully imprisoned for his cause, and that is very INFJ, death before dishonor, and you never bow down to the establishment. If you're doing what you believe is right and what you know to be right, you fight at all costs, no matter how much it comes back on you. And he is perhaps the best example of that, in at least in relatively modern history. So very much somebody I admire, much somebody who deserves admiration. But so social changes would include like true equality. We would INFJ leaders would do our best to make sure everybody receives an equal opportunity. Obviously that's not the same as an equal outcome, because not everybody truly fulfills the requirements in a true meritocracy, which no, we do not have. We have a corporatocracy or a nepotocracy or a cronytocracy. At least speaking about America, in fact, our system, the system based on success, first off, most wealth is inherited, and, people, it's all about being in the good old boys club. Good old boys don't have to be qualified. They just have to know somebody and shake a hand and be sober-ish, and they're golden. Also, and specifically speaking in terms of politics with people involved in political campaigns and that kind of thing, good old boys fail up. So if you horribly run a political campaign and get destroyed, those campaign advisors receive more cushy jobs, and corrupt politicians make hundreds of millions while they're in office, which is corrupt as shit. Insider trading isn't illegal for them. Their children get cushy jobs with CNN for $8 million a year right out of college with no experience or no real qualifications, simply because of their last name. People assumed they would be good in the position that their parents did, because even though I thought all that shit, rightfully should have ended with the end of the divine right of kings, and the fact that, this country was founded partially on the basis of we didn't want an aristocracy. We, in essence, have an unofficial aristocracy that is not only in existence. It is sadly for the majority worshipped by the majority, especially the boomers, because most of the good old boys are amongst their ranks, and therefore they are by definition the best people. Yes, so you know such systems do exist in other countries as well. Like, for example, what is the granddaddy of all old boys clubs? Well, that would be the House of Lords in the United Kingdom. To this day, as much as I've read, I don't understand the purpose of why hereditary peers should exist in modern times. And from what I've seen too, there's a good number of Brits who want to end that institution too, as it's a place where bills go to die. We have the Senate for that, which is also an old boy club where essentially politicians get elected for life and collect tons of money from lobbyists, and it's where bills go to die. So things like that would drastically change. I would say, economically speaking, in an INFJ run world, the economy would probably most closely resemble to a real world comparison would be a Scandinavian type system where indeed if one is willing to work hard and work full time, then they thus make a living wage, to where there is, an actual way to climb up the ladder through hard work and merit, as it existed in the youth of the baby boomers, who then famously, arrogantly, and in their minds deservingly, pulled up the ladder behind them and, you know, tripled the cost of college, gave shifted a ton of the tax burden from the rich and corporations to the middle class, outsourced most of the union jobs, crushed most of the remaining union jobs that weren't outsourced, you know, that kind of thing. You must have a master's degree, 5 years experience, and 12 references to be considered for an interview for the same job that, I chugged a beer in my car, went in and shook my uncle's best friend's hand and said, "Oh boy, you Smith's boy, hey, that's good enough for me." That kind of thing. That's the system they have, the system they worship, which gets a lot of young people in the younger generations discouraged because they're told what failures they are, despite the fact that many of us did exactly what the boomer gods told us to, and then they're like, well, just because, you know, you meet the qualifications doesn't mean that doesn't mean anything. The degrees, we said they're important, but we lied. That was to get more money in our pockets because we deserve it. We barely have 1/10 of what we deserve because we're gods. And so and so's nephew with 3 DUIs and, only a high school education and a drinking problem, he deserves that cushy job because everybody knows knowledge isn't learned, it's passed down through bloodlines. We say so. We're baby boomers. That kind of thing. So that would also change. In an INFJ world, people would be held accountable for their actions regardless of their wealth, fame, things like that. Last name, yeah, no, laws would actually be applied equally, and also equally regardless of one's, gender, skin tone, age. There would be, no special treatment for, white males, as we do get special treatment a lot of times, especially white male baby boomers. They get it to an even higher level. There's baby boomer privilege on top of white privilege. Just ask Joe Biden. He's been living in it his whole life. It must be cool to pay next to nothing for college, lie about, how you did in college, lie about your degrees, plagiarize somebody in your first run for president, have a horrible voting record, and have all that be swept under the rug and be touted as a hero solely on the basis of, I'm not Trump, and though he doesn't say it, it is certainly part of the equation. I'm in the club, which is, the basis of the world we live in, being in the club, and the club can never be questioned, and the club can use, abuse, and exploit anyone they wish and not be challenged, because any action of the club is by definition right. That would be done away with. There would be sweeping changes in an INFJ run world. Also, INFJ leaders, if we're speaking publicly, it means we have something important to say, as we, abhor platitudes and we don't like attention for attention's sake. an INFJ leader would be somewhat reclusive, and when an INFJ leader would, come out and give a speech or something, there would be substance and stuff that's actually going to be implemented in it, because an INFJ does not like the spotlight just for the sake of being in the spotlight. We can handle it if there is a purpose to it and it's, helping further our cause or our goals. So, you know, so news interruptions for every time, one of the world leaders walks off a plane, an INFJ would be like, no, leave me alone, go away, go away. I don't have anything important to say. Leave me alone. I'm not that important. That's would be the humility of the INFJ leaders. Um, there would be actual democracy, like rank choice voting. We wouldn't have first past the post systems, electoral colleges, gerrymandered districts. That wouldn't exist in an INFJ round world, because while that INFJ leader might want power for the sake of them believing they are actually believing in a just cause that will do the most good for the most people, they would not want to obtain power shadily through gerrymandering or superdelegates in a primary, things of that nature. So we would actually have a true democracy, and we would ensure everyone who meets the criteria to vote, which essentially I guess would be like 18 years old, maybe 16, would have the opportunity to vote, and there would be no voter suppression laws, as the GOP loves to do, particularly in heavily populated, lower income minority districts, because they don't vote for the GOP. They vote for the Democrats out of being lesser of two evils. And to be fair, the Democrats use the same tactics in primaries in districts of lower income people who are more likely to vote for the progressive candidate than their Clintonite member of the club. So that would be done away with. Oh, there would actually be regulation on monopolies. Things like Bain Capital would be done away with. There, of course, would be no voodoo economics. Again, people would actually be held accountable for their actions. For example, a good example of how the club wouldn't exist anymore. So when the crash of 2008 happened, there would not be tens of millions in bonuses paid out to the men who crashed the economy on their reckless gambling and on the basis of retaining the talent. What talent? They ran it into the ground. That would be equivalent of hiring a team of engineers to build a bridge, and they build it shoddy and not up to code. That bridge collapsed. Would it be logical to then pay those engineers millions in bonuses to retain their talent to build the replacement bridge, when they in fact just built the not up the code bridge that collapsed, and it turns out the reason why it wasn't up to code is because they were embezzling funds? Would you retain them? No, you put them on trial and most likely jail them, and hopefully they would be hit with more civil suits than they can defend, as and rightfully so. Yeah, we would not in any form in an INFJ world resemble anything of a theocracy, because somebody's religious belief is their choice, and nobody has the right to make one follow their religious beliefs. That's right, the goddess Diana's the best. If you don't think so, that's on you. I'm not going to force you to convert to my religion. Pagans are good about that. We don't really do that. And to be fair, neither do Jews. They're good about that too. But Christians and Muslims, you gotta chill with that shit. Believe what you want. Stop trying to convert everybody. If somebody wants to convert, they'll come to you. So that would not exist in an INFJ world. Yeah, it would be a better place, all in all. This is just a brief overview of some of the major points of what it would be like, and in a nutshell, it would be the end of the era of neoliberalism and good old boys clubs, for starters, amongst other things. Everybody would have health care in every country, even here in America, where healthcare is bad and corporations are good because St. Reagan said so. Apparently, that's pretty much the only explanation they have for that. Yeah. So corporations would not be people, by the way. No, 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 because they're, you know, not living beings or sentient in any way. They are a corporation who solely exists to make profit. If a corporation is a person, then a corporation must be eligible to then face some form of death penalty, which they are not. So, can't have it both ways. Yeah, there'd be no double standards in the INFJ run world. That is for sure. And I would say, in an INFJ run world, there'd be more fair pay based on one's actual need. Like there are certain jobs that are a necessity where sometimes people barely survive. You know, nurses, paramedics, firefighters, teachers, to name a few. Whereas professional athletes make a killing. Hate to say it, nobody needs professional football. It's solely entertainment. It doesn't have to exist. It doesn't need to exist in order for society to continue on its path. Like we need things like engineers, and you need things that some people overlook. Like you need linemen to work on the power lines, keep the lights on. You need engineers to build things. You need auto mechanics to keep cars running. Those are all. You need firefighters to put out fires, medics to get you to the hospital. Need police, although in an INFJ world they would be demilitarized. And of course, in an INFJ world, we wouldn't have the war economy. Yes, it is a fact, and throughout human history, a military of some kind does need to exist, but war economies, based on companies like with Sweetheart no bid contracts at places like Raytheon, Halliburton, and Honeywell, those would not exist. They are, in essence, what President Eisenhower, who was a general, warned us about in his farewell speech before his presidency ended. So, yes, there would be a military, but it would be more along the lines of what existed pre World War II, and even industries that would in fact have to exist in times of war to produce things for war. They would then in peacetime be shifted to non-military things. Like, just a quick example, if a company is building fighter jets in a time of war because you are fighting and bombing and it is a justifiable war like World War II, that is one thing. However, in a peacetime, that same company could be relatively easily converted to providing civilian aircraft, which would serve various functions in the country and perhaps the world by exporting them. But like if the Pentagon says we don't need another 1,000 tanks, but Halliburton gets the contract anyway because Dick Cheney's VP and he gets kickbacks, yeah, wouldn't exist in an INFJ world. So it is fun to think of what an INFJ run world would be like. I don't think under anybody's leadership we would be a true utopia. However, I do firmly believe that in a world run by INFJ leaders, the world would be much, much more of a meritocracy than the farce of meritocracy that has been created and touted as one, at least since the 1980s and the rise of boomer leadership and neoliberalism, aka Reaganism and Thatcherism. So listen to your own intuition about what an INFJ world would be like, and no matter how much they offer, don't sell out your integrity to be a part of the old boys club, because you're an INFJ. You will never be one of them. Even if they think you are, they will betray you. I've seen it happen.